I'm John Nicely. Well, the trial of Christopher Coleman was one of the most anticipated and closely watched in the St. Louis area in years. The outcome was, for the most part, somewhat expected. The public reaction was not. Listen to all that applause and cheering. This was right after the jury found Coleman guilty of murdering his wife and two young sons. Bystanders lined the area cheering as he was brought out of the courthouse in Waterloo, Illinois. It was a demonstration of the high emotion surrounding the 2009 murders of Coleman's wife, Sherry, and his sons, Garrett and Gavin. News 4, along with other media outlets, provided extensive coverage of the two-week trial. And joining News 4's Mark Cox each day at the courthouse for our coverage was St. Louis Post-Dispatch writer Nick Pistor. And Nick joins us now for his thoughts on the conclusion of this trial. First thing, what really stood out to you about this trial?
Just the sheer sort of sensational aspects of the whole thing that had gone on for the last 2 years leading up to the trial. It involved a mix of sex, religion, murder, money, and that sort of drove the coverage and drove the trial through the 2 weeks, and ultimately caused all those people to spill out from bars and their houses to cheer on his sentence.
And he is now a murderer. We can say that. He was convicted murderer, and this is something that we've had to say in the media business, alleged for all this time, but it's official now. He's in prison for life.
Yeah, you dropped the alleged, and it probably was a pretty clear signal to him that when a judge was talking to him about going to prison and how he's probably never going to come out, and that has to be a pretty hard thing for somebody who's 34 years old to deal with.
You talk about some of the sensational elements. He worked in security for a Christian ministry, and then he had this affair going with his wife's one of her best friends. So I know one of the most sensational days was when that mistress, Tara Lentz, testified. Talk about that day.
That was definitely the most anticipated testimony of the trial. She was basically the motive that prosecutors brought her in to prove that he killed his wife so he could keep his position as a bodyguard for televangelist Joyce Meyer. And when Tara Lentz arrived at the trial on Thursday, there were media everywhere, and she arrived, and everybody was looking at what she was wearing, her high heels. You could hear them clicking as she walked into the courtroom, and the jurors definitely took notice. And the most interesting thing was that she was wearing his promise ring, and she was asked about that by the prosecutor, and she admitted to it, and the jurors seemed to look on in much interest.
And they showed some very graphic stuff, some sexual stuff between him and the mistress, and all this going on while he was still married to Sherry Coleman. And of course, the day that he murdered his wife and two sons, he was going to be in touch with her.
Yeah, in fact, he had told his wife, or he had told his mistress, that he would get divorced from his wife the day of the murders. And ultimately that never happened because their bodies were found dead by police.
So he was convicted and he is sentenced to life in prison, but there's always an appeals process. What is the latest on that?
His lawyers say that they're beginning that process, that they've got 30 days to file their first initial appeal, and they're planning on doing that very soon.
Have they talked about what grounds you maybe anticipate them appealing on?
I assume they're going to look at a lot of different things. They may, they're upset that some things came in, particularly the sex videos and things like that, saying that it could just be too inflammatory to jurors. So they're going to try to look at probably a lot of things like that, and probably some other things, technical, legal things that we may not have cared too much about as reporters.
One issue with the jury is that the death penalty has now been outlawed in Illinois. That takes effect in July, but it was still in effect for this trial. So this jury had to be, I guess, they had to say that they were willing to impose the death penalty. And we talked with some attorneys, and they were saying that this leads a more likely guilty verdict when you have a jury that has to say they are willing to impose the death penalty.
Sure, it makes them more prone to convict. But ultimately, the death penalty was still the law and still on the books, and prosecutors were allowed to seek it, so it may be hard to mount any sort of appeal based on that.
Obviously, he didn't get the death penalty. Ultimately, he waived the right to have the jury decide, and the judge decided life in prison. One thing we've talked about is his change of appearance from when he was arrested back in 2009 to what he looked like in court. And we're showing you the pictures right here. What did you notice about his appearance?
He had lost about 30 pounds, according to one of his family members had told me that. So jail life had not treated him all that well. He was a big guy. He was working out a lot. You know, he had said he had gone to the gym the morning that the murders, that the bodies were found, and he had gone to the gym the night before. He was on some different types of drugs to beef up his system, and so he was doing a lot of weightlifting and things like that. Ultimately, all that went away, and in prison, he's basically taken on this look of a sort of scrubbed, church-going young man that he was hoping to project to jurors, but it didn't quite work that way.
Of course, you have Sherry Coleman. Her family was affected by all this. One thing her dad said that struck me was that he said, well, how can you be happy about something like this? Yes, it was the outcome we wanted, but there's really nothing happy about this whole situation. What was your take on the Coleman family reaction?
I think, you know, Chris's family in particular, they still believe in him and were upset by the jury's ultimate finding. Sherry Coleman's family, I think they were relieved to find some sort of closure in this, but ultimately at the end of the day, it may not give them the final closure that they're looking for.
Right. Okay, Nick Pistor has been writing about the Coleman trial. He's got another article in Sunday's Post-Dispatch talking about the costs of this trial. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.